Picture a country that has just killed its own king, not overthrown him, not exiled him, killed him in public on a wooden platform outside his own banqueting hall, in front of thousands of people who groaned when the axe came down, a sound one witness said he never forgot for the rest of his life, a moan like the whole crowd had been struck at once. Now fill that country with snow, deep snow, the kind England hadn't seen in years, falling so thick that the roads between towns vanish and the rivers freeze at the edges. Add soldiers on every corner, preachers arguing in every tavern about whether God has blessed or cursed the nation, printing presses running all night, and a headless body lying in a back room of a palace while men in black coats argue about what on earth you're supposed to do with it. That's England. February 1649. A kingdom without a king, a church without a prayer book, a winter without mercy. A place where you could hear a sermon about liberty in the morning and watch armed men seal a coffin in secret by night. We're going back there tonight, not as historians reading the state papers. We're living it. 1 week, one person. Everything they would have seen, smelled, heard, and survived, because the strangest funeral in English history needed ordinary hands to make it happen, and tonight, those hands are yours. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just lying in the dark waiting to hear about frozen corpses and soldered lead. Either way, you're here now. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The knock comes after midnight, and it is not a polite knock. You know before you're fully awake that something is wrong, because nobody knocks like that in Windsor anymore unless they're wearing a buff coat and carrying orders. 3 heavy blows on the workshop door below, a pause, then 3 more, harder, and a voice. Open in the name of Parliament. Your name is Thomas Fenn. You're 17 years old, apprentice to Master Aldous Crane, joiner and coffin maker of Peascod Street, Windsor, and you've been asleep for perhaps 2 hours on a straw pallet in the loft above the workshop, wrapped in a blanket that smells of sawdust and your own unwashed body, because it is the coldest winter anyone in the town can remember, and washing means breaking ice in a basin with your fist. You lie still for 1 heartbeat, half a second of blessed ignorance, then the smell of the workshop reaches you, the way it always does. Pine shavings, sharp and clean, linseed oil, thick and slightly sweet. Hide glue gone cold in its pot, which smells like a wet dog left out in the rain. The cold ash of yesterday's fire, and under all of it the deep mineral cold of February itself, a cold that has a smell of its own. Iron and stone and frozen earth. Below you hear Master Crane's bedroom door open, his feet on the stairs, the rattle of the bolt, then men's voices, low, urgent. You can't make out the words, but you can make out the tone, and the tone says this is not a customer. Thomas, Master Crane's voice, up through the loft hatch. Down, now, dress warm. You pull on your breeches over the shirt you sleep in, and the cloth is so cold it feels wet. Your stockings are frozen into stiff shapes overnight, and you have to crush them soft between your hands before your feet will go in. Your fingers ache before you've even touched a tool. This is what 17 years old feels like in the winter of 1649. Your knuckles are already cracked from cold and glue and lye, and there is a split at the base of your right thumb that reopens every single morning, a thin line of red that stings when the frost gets into it. You climb down the ladder into the workshop, and there are 3 soldiers standing among the coffin boards. They fill the room the way soldiers always fill rooms, not with their bodies exactly, but with the possibility of what their bodies might do. Buff leather coats, dark with damp, breastplates catching the light of the single candle Master Crane has lit, melting snow dripping off their boots onto the sawdust floor, each drop leaving a small dark crater. One of them has a musket rest slung over his shoulder, and the smell of match cord clings to all three of them, that particular scorched rope smell that has become the smell of England itself these past 7 years. The one in charge is older, maybe 40, with a grey stubbled jaw and eyes that don't rest anywhere for long. He looks at you the way a man looks at a tool, checking it for cracks. This the apprentice? He is, Master Crane says. He's steady. He better be. The soldier turns back to your master. You'll bring your tools. Solder, lead working irons, whatever you need for sealing. You'll ask no questions. You'll speak to no one on the way, and you'll speak to no one after. The governor's order. Master Crane is quiet for a moment. He's a big man, gone soft in the middle, 50 years old, with forearms like ship's rope from 40 years of planing oak, and hands so scarred and stained that you sometimes can't tell where the wood ends and the man begins. He's not easily frightened. You've seen him argue with grieving widows, drunk soldiers, and the vicar all in one afternoon. But he's quiet now. The castle, he says. It isn't a question. The soldier doesn't answer, which is an answer. And that's when you understand, really understand with your stomach and not your head, what work you're being taken to do in the middle of the night in the deepest snow in living memory, under orders of silence. Because everyone in Windsor knows what arrived at the castle yesterday evening. Carried up the hill in a plain hearse through falling snow, escorted by troopers with their swords drawn. Everyone knows. Nobody says it. The king is dead, and his body is 1/2 mile from where you're standing. You gather the tools while Master Crane dresses, and your hands know the work even when your mind is somewhere else entirely. These soldering irons, heavy as hammers, their copper heads dark with old flux. The ladle for melting lead, its long handle worn smooth. The bar solder wrapped in sacking. Tallow for flux, in a clay pot with a wooden lid that sticks in the cold and has to be twisted free with both hands. A roll of soft lead sheet, thin as parchment at the edges, which bends with a sound like a whisper and leaves grey smears on everything it touches. Your palms, your sleeves, the sacking, the world. Lead is strange stuff. It's the heaviest thing in the workshop and the softest. You can score it with a fingernail, fold it like cloth, and yet a full sheet of it will pull your arms out of their sockets if you lift it wrong. Master Crane taught you the trick your first year. Never lift lead with your back straight and your arms out. Get under it. Let your legs do the hating. Tonight there's a lot of lead. Because tonight's coffin, the coffin your master finished 2 days ago, working behind a locked door, the coffin you were told was for a gentleman of the garrison, and knew better than to ask about. Tonight's coffin has an inner shell of lead, and lead coffins are not for gentlemen of the garrison. Lead coffins are for people who are meant to last. The walk up to the castle takes 15 minutes on a summer afternoon. Tonight it takes 40. The snow in Peascod Street is knee-deep where it hasn't been trodden, and where it has been trodden it's worse. Packed to grey ice, polished by boots, treacherous as glass. You walk in single file behind the soldiers, carrying the tool bag on your shoulder, and the strap cuts into the muscle at the base of your neck, and your breath freezes in your scarf until the wool goes stiff against your mouth. and the only sounds in the entire world are the creak of snow underfoot, that dry, complaining creak that only comes with hard frost, and the hiss of more snow falling, and somewhere far off, a dog barking twice, and then thinking better of it. Windsor at night, in February 1649, is dark in a way you cannot imagine unless you've lived it. There are no lamps. There are no lit windows because candles cost money and everyone decent is asleep. There is snowlight, that faint grey glow that snow gives back to a clouded sky. Just enough to show you the shapes of houses like sleeping animals, and above them, hanging over the whole town like a judgment, the castle. You've lived under that castle your whole life. It's the largest thing you have ever seen or ever will see. The great grey keep on its mound, the long walls running along the ridge, the towers. William the Conqueror put the first fortress on that chalk hill nearly 600 years ago, and kings have been building onto it ever since, stone on stone, reign on reign, until the castle stopped being a building and became something more like weather. It's simply always there. You check it the way you check the sky. But it's changed these past years. The King's banner doesn't fly over it anymore. Parliament took Windsor Castle right at the start of the war in 1642, and it's been a garrison and a prison ever since. The deer in the great park were slaughtered for meat. Soldiers stabled horses where courtiers used to walk, and in the chapel, in St. George's Chapel, the most beautiful building in Berkshire, maybe in England, Parliament's men broke up the organ, stripped the ornaments, carried off the silver, and melted down anything that would melt. You were 11 when it happened. You remember men wheeling barrows of ripped-up vestments down the hill, and one of them wearing an embroidered cope over his shoulders as a joke, gold thread flashing in the daylight and everyone laughing and your mother pulling you indoors by the collar and not saying one word. That's the England you've grown up in. You were 10 when the war started. You're 17 now. You do not really remember peace. You remember it the way you remember being small, something that happened to a person who was you and also wasn't. At the castle gate, torches. The first real light you've seen in an hour, and it hurts. Orange and greasy, gnawing at the dark. The guards check the soldiers' papers, then look at you and your master for a long moment, and one of them says something quiet to the grey-jawed man, and the grey-jawed man says something quiet back, and the gate opens just wide enough, and you pass through into the lower ward, and the gate shuts behind you with a boom you feel through the soles of your frozen boots. And there it is, St. George's Chapel, filling the whole west end of the ward, its great window black, its pinnacles catching the snowlight, its buttresses standing out from the walls like the ribs of some huge patient animal lying down in the cold. That's where you're going. You know it before anyone says it, but first they take you somewhere else. A door in the range of buildings along the north side, then a stone passage where your footsteps slap and echo, then stairs, then another passage, colder than outdoors somehow, the way stone buildings in winter always are, as if the walls have been saving up cold since November and are giving it back with interest. The soldier in front carries a lantern, and the light swings, and your shadow lurches along the wall beside you like a drunk trying to keep up. Then a door, and in front of the door 2 more soldiers standing so still you almost take them for armour on stands. The grey-jawed man stops, turns, and for the first time all night he looks uncertain, not afraid exactly, but like a man about to hand something heavy to a stranger and hoping the stranger's grip is good. What you see in this room, he says, you will never describe. Not to your wife, not to your priest, not to your own selves, out loud, alone. There are men in London who would take this body if they knew the hour it goes into the ground, and there are other men who would pay to see it shamed. Neither happens, that is why it's night. That is why it's you, a town joiner and a boy, and not a London undertaker with a London mouth. He looks at you specifically then, 17 years old, lead smears on your hands, heart going like a smith's hammer. Do your work well, lad, he says, and in 50 years you'll be the only man alive who knows where a king sleeps. Then he opens the door. The room is small and it's full of candles, and that is the first shock. The sheer extravagance of light. A dozen wax candles at least. Real wax, not tallow, burning steady in the still air because whatever else Parliament will deny this body, apparently it will not deny it light. The second shock is the smell. You expected death. You know death's smell. You're a coffin maker's apprentice. You've been in rooms with the dead since you were 14. You've learned the stages of it the way other boys learn psalms. But this room doesn't smell of death. It smells of spice. Myrrh and something resinous. Frankincense, maybe. And under that a sharp, clean chemical bite that stings your nose. Spirits of wine and something bitter. Aloes. And under that, faint, like a word spoken in another room, the cold butcher smell of a body opened and closed again. The surgeons did their work in London days ago. They embalmed him the old way, the way you embalm someone you expect people to want to look at across long distances and long delays, organs out, cavities packed with spice, everything wrapped and sealed in waxed cloth called cere cloth, layer on layer, until the man becomes a package. The third shock is how small it is. The body lies on trestles in the middle of the room, wrapped to the chin in its cerecloth, covered to the breast with a length of dark velvet, and it is the size of a body. That sounds like nothing. It is everything, because this is the man whose face is on every coin in your pocket. This is the man whose image sat above the chancel arch of your parish church, your entire childhood, crowned and enormous. This is Charles, by the grace of a God King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, defender of the faith. And in life he stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, shorter than you, shorter than almost every soldier who guarded him, and in death, wrapped and diminished, he looks like what he is, a slight middle-aged man who had a very bad January. You cannot see his face. The head is wrapped separately. You know why, and your mind touches the fact and flinches off it like a finger off a hot iron, and then, because minds are cruel, touches it again. The head is wrapped separately because 10 days ago, on the 30th of January, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on a scaffold built outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, a masked man took it off with one blow of an axe. You weren't there. Nobody from Windsor was there, so far as you know. But you've heard about it every single day since, because England has talked about nothing else. In taverns, at market, over fences, in whispers and shouts and sermons. You've heard how the king wore 2 shirts because the morning was bitter and he didn't want to shiver, didn't want the crowd to think he trembled from fear. You've heard how he spoke from the scaffold, but the soldiers were packed so thick and the crowd held so far back that almost no one heard the words, how he said he was going from a corruptible crown to an incorruptible one, how he tucked his hair up under a white satin cap with his own hands, helped by the bishop so the neck would be clear, How he knelt at the low block, insultingly low, barely a hand's height, so a man couldn't kneel upright at it but had to lie down flat to his death, and stretched out his hands as the signal, and how the axe fell, and how the crowd did not cheer. That's the thing everyone repeats. The crowd did not cheer. Thousands of Londoners, 7 years of war, all the pamphlets, all the sermons, all the hatred. And when the head came up in the executioner's fist, what came out of the crowd was a groan. A single enormous involuntary sound wrenched out of thousands of throats at once, like the whole city had been struck in the stomach. And then the troops of horse moved in and swept the streets clear, and people ran to dip handkerchiefs in the blood, some for hatred, some for love, some because a king's blood was said to heal. And England woke up the next morning as something no Englishman had ever been before. A people who had tried their king in a court of law, found him guilty of treason against his own subjects and killed him. No one in the history of the world had ever done it quite like that. Kings had been murdered, poisoned, deposed, killed in battle, quietly starved in castles. England itself had done most of those more than once. But a public trial, a sentence read aloud, an execution by daylight before the people, with the king's name on a legal document. Never. The men who signed that death warrant, 59 of them, their signatures and seals in neat columns, knew they were doing something new under the sun. Some of them were proud of it. Some of them, you will learn much later, could barely hold the pen. And the 10 days between the scaffold and this room have a story of their own, which you piece together over the years from soldiers' talk and servants' talk, and, much later, from printed accounts. And it is worth telling here, over the trestles, because the body in front of you has already made a journey stranger than most living men ever take. Within an hour of the axe, the scaffold was cleared and the body carried into the banqueting house, back through the very window it had stepped out of past Rubens' painted ceiling, which the king himself had commissioned in better days, a vast glorification of his own father ascending into heaven, so that Charles Stuart's corpse was carried beneath a picture of a Stuart being received by angels. And if you think God does not write in irony, there is your answer. The surgeons did their work. And the surgeons, this detail, when you finally hear it, undoes you a little even decades on. The surgeons sewed the head back to the body, carefully, properly. Because embalming demands a whole man, and because some whispered, certain officers feared relic hunters would pay fortunes for a king's head, and because, say it plainly, because even the men who ordered the killing could not quite bear the thing they had made, and wanted him mended. Then the wrapping, the cere cloth, the spice. Then a few days lying at Whitehall and at St. James's, where a small number of people were permitted to come and look, friends needing to grieve, and enemies needing to be sure, which are two appetites every dead king must feed. And the army watched everyone who came and took names. And then the last ride, the 7th of February, a plain hearse drawn by 6 horses, no plumes, no arms, no torches, a gentleman's funeral conveyance and not 1 inch more. Going out of London by the western roads in the worst weather of the decade, with 4 coaches of the king's old servants following and a guard of troopers. And here is the part the carriers themselves told in taverns for years. The snow was falling the whole way, through Brentford, through Hounslow, over Hounslow Heath where the wind had the snow moving sideways like white smoke, through Colnbrook where they rested the horses, 20-odd miles of white silence, the little black procession crawling across it like a line of ink on an unwritten page, and almost nobody on the roads to see it pass. And those few who were, standing at their gates or reining in at the verge, taking off their hats in the falling snow without knowing for certain who went by. Because you uncover for any hearse, that's simple decency, so that the King of England went to his grave saluted anonymously by strangers as a stranger. They brought him up the hill into the castle by torchlight on the evening of the 7th. The garrison received him in silence. Colonel Whichcott had the body lodged in the Dean's house first, and then moved to the room where you now stand, and the town below, which had watched the torches climb the hill, went to bed that night knowing and not knowing, the whole of Windsor lying awake in the dark doing exactly what you were doing, listening and not saying it. And now the problem that nobody in 1,000 years of English kingship had ever had to solve. What do you do with the body? You cannot give him Westminster Abbey. That's where kings go, where his own ancestors lie, where Elizabeth lies, where his father James lies in the vault of Henry VII under all that carved stone lace. But Westminster is the middle of London, and London is a powder keg, and a dead king's tomb in the middle of London would become a shrine by Easter and a rallying point by summer. Men would pray there. Men would swear oaths there. The government said no. You cannot dump him in a pit either, though some of the fiercest men in the army might have liked to. Half of Europe is watching. The dead king's son is alive, 18 years old, across the water, and calling himself Charles II, and one day there might be a reckoning, and men who desecrated a king's corpse would be remembered. Besides, and this matters more than you'd think, the men now running England are, most of them, deeply serious Christians. Whatever they thought of Charles Stuart the tyrant, the man is dead now, and the dead are God's business. Decency, but quietly. Burial, but no spectacle. Honour, but behind locked doors and after dark. So, Windsor, far enough from London. A castle already held by a trusted garrison, with walls, gates, and a governor who takes orders. A chapel that was built for kings, stripped of everything Parliament finds offensive, and, most important of all, lockable. That is why the plain hearse came up the hill yesterday through the snow. That is why the body of the King of England is lying on trestles in a small room by candlelight, watched by soldiers, smelling of myrrh. And that is why you are here, at 2 a.m, 17 years old, with a bag of soldering irons biting into your shoulder, trying very hard to keep your breathing quiet. Master Crane sets down his bag. He takes off his hat, slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he's decided something, and holds it against his chest, and after a moment, without quite meaning to, you do the same, and the cold air of the room touches your sweat-damp hair, and the candles burn absolutely straight, and nobody says anything at all. Then your master clears his throat and becomes a tradesman again, because that is the mercy of a trade. It gives your hands somewhere to go when your soul doesn't know where to stand. "The coffin," he says quietly to the sergeant. "Bring it in. We'll want the trestles a foot apart further, and I'll want the boy the other side of the seam from me. The work begins. Let me tell you what it actually takes to seal a man in lead, because almost nobody alive today has seen it done, and in 1649 it is a craft with rules as strict as any liturgy. The coffin comes in 2 parts. The outer shell is oak, good English oak, quarter sawn, an inch thick, the boards jointed so tight you couldn't slide a knife blade into the seam. Master Crane made it himself, and you planed those boards until your shoulders burned. 3 days ago, back when it was a gentleman of the garrison. And you didn't let yourself think. Inside the oak sits the lead shell, and the lead shell is the real coffin. Oak keeps out the earth. Lead keeps in the king. 6 men carry it in. 4 soldiers and 2 grooms of the household who have been kept on to tend the body. Older men with red eyes. Men who served this king in life and now fold his cerecloth and trim his candles in death. The lead-lined coffin, empty, weighs as much as 2 grown men. You hear the carrier's breath go short and see the tendons stand out in their necks, and the sergeant hisses at them to keep it level, keep it level. Then the moving of the body. You're not asked to help with that, and you're glad in a way that shames you. The 2 grooms and 2 soldiers lift him, a wrapped, spiced, surprisingly rigid weight, and the older groom keeps one hand cupped under the wrapped head the entire time, supporting it the way you'd support the head of a sleeping child, and that small gesture, that hand, is the thing your mind will keep. Not the scaffold stories, not the candles. That old man's hand under the head, and the care in it, 30 years of service refusing to end just because the world had. They lay him in. They settle the wrappings. Someone, you don't see who, tucks a small bag of spice in at the feet, and the older groom stands looking down for a moment, lips moving, saying something that in a churchier England would have been said aloud by a bishop with a choir behind him, and here is said silently by a servant with cracked lips. And then he steps back and nods to your master. And now it's yours. The lid of a lead shell doesn't hinge or clasp. It is a sheet of lead dressed down over the edges of the shell, overlapping like pastry over a pie dish, and then the seam, the entire seam, every inch of the coffin's perimeter, some 18 feet of it, must be soldered shut. Melted metal flowed into the joint, continuous, no gaps, because a gap the width of a pin defeats the whole purpose. First the fire. There's a brazier of charcoal in the corner, brought in for the purpose, and you get it going with a soldier working small bellows, and the charcoal ticks and settles and breathes orange, and for the first time in 6 hours some part of your body is warm, and the warmth is so sudden and so good that your eyes water. The irons go into the coals, 4 of them, so that 2 heat while 2 work, and you watch for the colour your master taught you. Not red, never red. Red is too hot and will melt through the sheet lead itself, and then you have a hole where you wanted a seal. You want the head of the iron grey going gold, hot enough to make solder run like water, cool enough to leave the lead beneath it merely soft. While the irons heat, you dress the seam. This is your job and you're good at it, and being good at it is the plank you cling to. You go around the coffin on your knees with a wooden dresser, a smooth hardwood tool like a fat blunt chisel, and you tap and press the overlapping lead down tight against the shell, working the metal like stiff dough, chasing out every ripple. Lead moves under the dresser with a dense, dead feel no other metal has, a putty made of weight. Where your bare fingers steady the sheet, the cold of it burns, and then your skin warms it, and the lead takes the shape of your pressure, the way snow takes a footprint. Tap, press, slide, tap. Your knees ache on the stone floor. The split at the base of your thumb has opened again, and you are careful, very careful, not to let it touch the metal, because Master Crane has drilled it into you since your first week. Lead is a slow poison. It gets in through broken skin and under fingernails and off unwashed hands onto bread, and old lead workers go grey-gummed and trembling and strange. You'll scrub with vinegar after. You always scrub with vinegar after. Then the tallow, wiped along the dressed seam with a rag, the flux, the grease that lets solder flow and bond instead of beading up like water on a wax boot. The smell of it warming is the smell of a kitchen. Absurdly. Mutton fat and Sunday, here in this room with this work. Then the soldering itself, and the room goes silent for it, because everyone can feel that this is the thing they were all brought here to witness. Master Crane takes the first iron. You take the stick of solder and kneel across the coffin from him, and he sets the hot copper head to the seam and touches the solder bar to it, and the metal runs. A bright bead, quicksilver bright against the dull grey, chasing the heat, sinking into the joint with a tiny sound, a hiss so faint it's more feeling than hearing. He draws the iron along, slow as a man writing his name in his best hand, and you feed the solder, and the bright line follows the iron and then goes cloudy as it sets, cloudy and solid and permanent, and behind the iron, inch by inch, the King of England is being sealed away from the air of the world. Iron cools, you swap it for a hot one, the rhythm establishes itself. Feed, draw, hiss, swap. Feed, draw, hiss, swap. Your master's breathing slows into work breathing. Yours matches it. The soldiers stand against the walls, the candles burn. Somewhere far above you, muffled by 10 feet of stone, the chapel clock strikes 4, and the sound comes down to you the way sound comes through water. Halfway along the second side, Master Crane speaks very low, without lifting his eyes from the seam. Steady the feed, you're trembling it. Sorry, master, not sorry, steady. A pause, the iron moving. Whatever this is, boy, it's still only a seam. Do the seam. The rest isn't ours to carry. Do the seam. The rest isn't ours to carry. You will hear those words in your head for the rest of your life, in 100 situations that have nothing to do with lead. It is the best advice anyone will ever give you, and it is given at 4 in the morning over the body of a beheaded king by a fat old joiner with tallow on his fingers. It takes nearly 3 hours, 18 feet of seam, twice worked, first pass to tack, second pass to flood and fill. By the end, your knees have gone from pain to a kind of ringing numbness. Your right hand has cramped twice around the solar bar and had to be pried straight, and your eyes sting from charcoal fumes and concentrated staring. The last inches are at the head end. Master Crane does those himself slowly, and you notice that he works them finer than any seam you've ever seen him lay, a seam like a silver cord, and you understand that this is the only eulogy the man is able to give, and that he is giving it. The iron lifts. The last bead clouds and sets. Done. Master Crane straightens with a grunt, presses both fists into the small of his back, and looks down at the sealed grey shape for a long moment. "Get the plate," he says, "because there is one more thing, and it is the strangest, most human thing of the whole night. Someone in authority. You never learn who. The governor, perhaps, or the lords who are coming, or some clerk with a conscience, has ordered a small plate of lead, and on it, before you arrived, someone has scratched in plain letters, no titles, no arms, no Latin, King Charles, 1648. 1648, because England still starts its legal year in March, so January of what you'd call 1649 is to the men in this room the tail end of 48. The plate is fixed to the coffin, and that's it. That is the entire monument the government of England will allow the man who was its king, his name and a date, scratched into a scrap of the same metal you've been kneeling on all night. No stone, no effigy, no inscription about grace or God or faith defended. A luggage label for eternity. The sergeant opens the door. The cold of the passage pours in like water. Outside the narrow window, the darkness has gone from black to iron grey, and somewhere a crow is complaining about the snow, and it is the morning of the 8th of February, and the body is sealed, and the burial... You hear the soldiers murmuring it. The burial cannot happen yet, because they haven't decided where to put him. In the whole vast chapel of St. George, built by kings, filled with king's work, nobody knows where the grave is going to be. You're about to find out why, and so are they. They don't let you go home. You half expected that. A soldier walks you and Master Crane across the lower ward to a guardroom with a fire, and there's barley bread and hard cheese and a jug of small beer, and you eat like a wolf because your body doesn't care whose coffin it's sealed. Your body has been awake and working in the cold for 7 hours, and it wants bread. The cheese is so cold it squeaks against your teeth. The small beer is thin and sour and the best thing you've ever tasted. You fall asleep sitting upright on a bench with your back against warm stone, and you dream of nothing. And a hand shakes you awake in what turns out to be the early afternoon, and the light through the guardroom window is the flat white light of a world buried in snow, and everything that happened in the candle room briefly has the texture of something you dreamed, until you look down at your hands, grey-smeared, vinegar-scrubbed, the thumb split angry, and know you didn't. Chapel, the soldier says. Both of you. Bring the bars and the long chisel. They're finding the place. The walk from the guardroom to the chapel is 200 paces across the lower ward, and in daylight you finally see the castle at war with itself, and it's worth seeing, because this is what revolutions actually look like up close, not fire and trumpets, but repurposing. The ward is a garrison yard now. Where heralds and choristers crossed, a farrier has set up under a lean-to against 600-year-old stone, and the ring of his hammer bounces off the chapel's west front, and the smell of scorched hoof, that thick, sulphurous, hair-burning smell that gets into your spit, drifts across ground where garter processions walked. Firewood is stacked against the wall of the canon's cloister, a wood pile as big as a cottage, because a garrison in this winter eats wood the way it eats bread. 2 soldiers are butchering a pig by the well, working fast in the cold, steam rolling off the opened carcass in a column, their forearms red to the elbow, and a dog sits at the exact respectful distance dogs learn, and one of the men is whistling a psalm tune while he works, Old Hundredth, absently, beautifully, and that, the psalm and the pig and the steam and the chapel behind, that is 1649. You couldn't put it in a painting. Nobody would believe the painting. The horses are everywhere, that's the other thing. Picketed lines of them along the south wall, blanketed, stamping, their breath making a low local fog, the sweet ammonia smell of horse lines carrying 50 yards, and a boy your age forking hay down the line, and you catch his eye and he catches yours, and there passes between you the Freemasonry of cold boys doing outdoor work in February, a look that says about 2 hours till dinner, hold fast, and then you both go back to your worlds. And through the middle of all of it, twice, small parties of officers cross toward the deanery with papers under their arms, walking fast, talking low, and every soldier's eye in the ward tracks them without seeming to, because the garrison knows something is happening even if it doesn't know what, and a castle full of men who half know something is the tensest structure ever built by man. You hear, in one snatch as they pass, a single sentence. The Lords will have it done by Friday, or not at all. And then they're gone through a doorway, and the farrier's hammer rings on. Master Crane walks beside you with the bars over his shoulder, saying nothing, watching everything from under his hat brim, and outside the chapel door he stops you with a hand and does something he's done maybe 4 times in your apprenticeship. He explains himself. In there, he says, you'll see great men. You'll maybe see them weep, or worse, quarrel. You'll want to look. Don't. You're a pair of hands and a strong back, and a pair of hands has no eyes and no memory. Look at the floor. It's the floor we're here for, he settles the bars. And Thomas, if any man, wearing anything, asks you afterward what was said in there, you say you were minding your work and heard nothing. It'll be true. Make it true. Make it true. You've been turning that one over your whole life since. It sounds like a lie's instruction manual, and it's the opposite. He was teaching you that attention is a door you can choose to close, that a man can honestly not know a thing by declining to gather it, and that in dangerous times this is not cowardice. It's how small people survive the quarrels of great ones with their souls intact. There were years of the century when half of England was busy making things true this way. It kept the country from bleeding even worse than it did. Understand what St. George's Chapel is before you walk into it, because you're about to spend the strangest afternoon of your life inside it. It is not a chapel the way your parish church is a church. It's a cathedral in everything but name, begun by King Edward IV in 1475 and finished under Henry VIII, a masterpiece of the last age of English Gothic. The nave soars. The great stone vault overhead is not really a ceiling, but a spreading of stone branches, fan vaulting, each fan opening from its pillar like a palm leaf carved by someone who had seen heaven and was working from memory. In the choir, the wooden stalls of the Knights of the Garter rise in dark carved tiers, and above each knight's seat for nearly 200 years hung his banner, his helm, his crest, the whole history of English chivalry arranged like a library of glory. Or it did. Remember, the plunderers came in 42 and after. The organ is broken, the silver is gone, the banners are pulled down. Edward IV's own tomb was cracked open by soldiers, and men pulled his burial vestments apart for the gold, and someone cut off a lock of the dead king's hair as a curiosity. The stained glass that survives does so mostly because glass is hard to sell and high up. So what you walk into that white afternoon is a magnificent body with everything stripped from it that could be stripped. Cold as a cave, echoing, dim, the fan vaults still opening overhead in all their perfection, 'cause no cart could carry them away, and the floor a great field of black and white stone squares, dusted at the door with blown snow. And standing in the middle of that floor in the choir are 8 or 9 men with lanterns and papers, arguing quietly about where to bury a king. You know some of them by sight. Colonel Christopher Witchcott, Governor of Windsor Castle. A serious, watchful, fair-dealing man by reputation. Even the dead king's friends will admit later that Witchcott handled these days with decency. A couple of his officers. The chapel's remaining vergers. Old men who have kept keys and swept floors through all the ruin because somebody has to. And 4 men apart from the rest, in deep black, and the quality of that black stops you in your tracks. Not soldier's black or preacher's black. Velvet. Fur at the collar. The kind of black that costs more than colour. Lords, Master Crane breathes, barely a sound. That's Richmond. God's my witness, the Duke of Richmond. You will learn all 4 names before nightfall, and you should hear them now, because these 4 men are this week performing one of the loneliest duties in English history. The Duke of Richmond, the King's kinsman, the Marquis of Hertford, the Earl of Southampton, the Earl of Lindsey, whose own father was killed fighting for this king at Edgehill, the first great battle of the war, and now the son has come to bury the master the father died for. 4 of the greatest royalists in England, men who fought and paid and lost everything in the king's cause. They asked Parliament for permission to see their master decently buried, and Parliament, this is the strangeness of the age, cruelty and scruple side by side, said yes. Yes, they may bury him. At Windsor. Quickly. Privately. And the state will even pay. £500 are allotted for the funeral of the man the state itself killed. An enormous sum. More than your master will earn in a decade. And almost none of it will be spendable, because everything money usually buys for a royal funeral is forbidden. No procession, no crowds, no monument, and, though the Lords don't know it yet, no prayer book. Hold that. It's coming, and it is the cruelest cut of the whole affair. Right now, this afternoon, the problem is simpler and stranger. Nobody knows where the royal vault is. That sounds impossible. It isn't. Think it through. The chapel's floor is acres of stone. Burial vaults are underneath, sealed, deliberately unmarked or marked only in records. And the records are in London, or scattered, or burnt, and the canons who knew the floor like their own faces were expelled years ago. The old vergers half remember. Everyone knows Henry VIII lies here somewhere, the most famous king England ever had, dead 102 years, who commanded a tomb so magnificent it was never finished, and later kings quietly sold off the pieces. He lies in a vault in the choir beside Jane Seymour, his 3rd wife, the one who gave him his son and died for it. But the vault has no marker. The floor was relaid. 100 years of feet have polished away memory, so the Lords, and the governor, and the vergers, and you, because this is why they sent for the bars and the long chisel, spend the afternoon hunting for a dead king by sound. This is real. This happened. And it works like this. A man walks slowly along the choir floor, striking it with a staff or a bar, and everyone listens. Solid ground answers one way. A dead knock, short, swallowed. A hollow beneath answers another. A knock with a shadow on it. A faint boom under the crack. The stone admitting there is air below. The chapel is so cold your breath hangs in the lantern light like tobacco smoke. The sound of the striking bar goes up into the fan vaults and comes back changed, multiplied, so that every knock is a small crowd of knocks. You walk the rows with the 2nd bar. Knock, step, knock, step. Your ears sharpen until you can hear the difference between stone laid on rubble and stone laid on sand. The Lords stand watching, saying little. Once the Earl of Lindsey crouches, a great nobleman of England, fur collar and all, going down on his heels like a farmer, and lays his bare palm flat on the freezing stone as if he could feel the hollowness through his skin. Maybe he can. Grief makes people believe strange things about their hands. It's one of the vergers who finds it late in the afternoon near the middle of the choir, close by the sovereign's stall. His bar comes down and the sound is wrong in exactly the right way, thump with a hole in it. And he strikes twice more, left and right, mapping the wrongness, and says, in a voice caught between triumph and fear, "Here, my lords, there's a void here." And then it's chisels and bars, and it's you. because lords don't lift pavement, and neither, it turns out, do soldiers when there are tradesmen standing right there. You and Master Crane and 2 garrison men work the long chisel into the joint, spring the first stone, get the bars under it. The stone is 3 inches thick and comes up with the sucking reluctance of something that has lain undisturbed for a century, and the smell that rises out of the darkness underneath is like nothing else on earth. Cold beyond cold, dry, mineral, with an undertaste of old mortar and something else, something faintly sweet and leathery and ancient, the specific smell of a sealed room where time has been standing perfectly still since before your grandfather was born. A lantern is lowered on a cord. Every head leans in, lords and soldiers and vergers and one 17-year-old apprentice, rank forgotten, all of you just human beings looking into a hole. The vault is small, brick-lined, neat, and in it, 2 coffins. One is enormous, a vast leaden thing, big as a boat, its lid strangely wrenched and sunken with age. The other beside it is slight, almost dainty by comparison, resting quietly under 100 years of settled dust, Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. Nobody speaks for a long moment. Then somebody, you never learn who, one of the officers maybe, says what every single person around that hole is thinking. There's room for a 3rd. And so the decision makes itself. The king will not get a new vault dug for him. There's no time. The ground is iron with frost, and secrecy shortens every plan. He will be laid beside Henry VIII, the founder of the Church of England, next to the king, who died for refusing to give that church up. The lords confer in low voices, and you see Richmond nod slowly, and someone says it will serve, and someone else says God has provided, and the hole in the floor breathes its ancient cold up into the lantern light, and outside the great windows the white day is already failing into blue, and the snow, which paused at noon, has begun to fall again. Tomorrow, then, the 9th of February, tomorrow they bury the king. That night they let you sleep in the guard-room again, and you lie awake longer than you should, listening to the garrison sounds of the castle, a challenge and countersign at the gate, boots on the wall walk overhead, quick and regular, the cough of a sentry, the shudder of wind coming off the river and finding every gap in the old stone. Master Crane snores beside the fire like a sawpit. You think about the small coffin down there in the dark of the chapel, waiting on its trestles near the open vault with 2 soldiers standing guard over it in the cold, and you think about the big ruined coffin under the floor, and about how Henry VIII was the terror of the world. 6 wives, the monasteries pulled down at his word, abbots hanged, queens beheaded. Beheaded, there's that word again, this family and that axe. And how all of it ended in a brick box under a pavement that people walked over for 100 years without knowing. You're 17, and you're having, for the first time, the thought that every human being has eventually, usually at night, usually in winter, it ends the same for all of them, for all of us. The terror of the world and the coffin-maker's boy, the same dark, the same quiet. It should be a frightening thought. Strangely, it isn't. It's almost a hand on the shoulder. You fall asleep in the middle of it. Before we get to that morning, stay in the night before it a while longer, because the night before is where you learn who this dead man actually was. Not from books, from a witness. They post you and Master Crane in a side room off the chapel cloister to sleep near your tools, in case the vault work runs into trouble at first light, and the room has a small fire, and sharing that fire, wrapped in a patched cloak, sits the older groom, the one whose hand cupped the wrapped head. His name, you learn, is Mr. Ayres, and he has served in the royal household since before you were born, and he cannot sleep, and old men who cannot sleep beside fires will talk, and boys who ask soft questions will be talked to. And here's the thing you had half forgotten, that all of Windsor had lived through and then folded away. The king was here, not the body, the man, just weeks ago. Through the whole of December and into January, Charles Stuart was a prisoner in this very castle, lodged in the royal apartments while the army decided what to do with him, and the town knew it, and you knew it, and once, you tell Ayres this, shyly, and his face opens, once you actually saw him. It was a grey afternoon a few days before Christmas, the abolished Christmas, and you were delivering a mended chair up to the castle kitchens, and across the ward, on the north terrace, a small party of gentlemen walked for exercise with soldiers before and behind, and one of the gentlemen was slighter than the rest, and walked with a particular deliberate dignity, unhurried, as if the escort were his honour guard and not his jailers, and someone beside you breathed, "That's him, that's the king," and for perhaps 10 seconds you looked at Charles Stuart alive, a small grey-cloaked figure at 80 paces, breath steaming, pausing once to look out over the river valley toward Eton at the view his grandmother's cousin Elizabeth had looked at, and his father, and every sovereign back to the conqueror. Looking at it, you understand now, the way a man looks at something he is memorizing. Ayres nods at all this slowly, firelight in the wet of his eyes, and gives you the other side of the tapestry. What it was like within doors, those weeks. How the king kept his small court of attendants to the forms even in captivity. Meals served with ceremony to a table of one, the cup offered on the knee, because he held that the office was from God, and did not lapse merely because soldiers held the doors. How he read constantly, his Shakespeare, he loved the plays, annotated them in his own hand, and Bishop Andrew's sermons, and always the prayer book, the offices morning and evening without fail. How his little dog, a spaniel named Rogue, had been with him through earlier imprisonments, and was taken from him. How he had a stammer all his life, worked at and mastered until it was only a hesitation, a small gathering pause before certain words. And how on the scaffold, men who heard him said, the stammer was gone entirely, and he spoke as fluently as he ever had in 48 years, as if the thing he had feared all his life having finally arrived, there was nothing left to trip on. He was not an easy master to serve, mind, Ayres says into the fire, with the terrible honesty of the bereaved. Stiff, certain. He could not bend, and he could not lie except when he convinced himself first, and he treated a signed treaty like an opening bid, and that boy is a fair share of why there was a war and why there was a scaffold, and I'll say it to his face at the judgment. But the fire ticks. But he was gentle with servants, never a hard word for a slow dish in 30 years. He knew our children's names, and he died better than any man I ever heard of. So there's your king, all of him, and they can carve nothing on his coffin, but they cannot carve nothing on us. The fire burns down. Ayres sleeps at last, upright, chin on chest, a man of 60 snoring gently 40 feet from his master's coffin, keeping his last vigil by accident. You lie on your back on the floor near the warmth, and listen to the wind work at the cloister, and do the arithmetic every subject of the century does eventually, and cannot make it come out even. A war over how to pray, and who commands, and whether a king may tax without asking. Perhaps 180,000 English dead of battle and camp sickness. Some say more. 1 man in 20, 1 in 10 in some counties, a proportion, though you have no way to know this, worse than England will suffer in the great wars of centuries far ahead. Ireland bled white, Scotland invaded and invading, brothers who have not spoken since Naseby, and at the end of the ledger, a small man in lead beside Henry VIII, and a colonel guarding him who prays as fervently as he did to the same God out of a different book. You are 17, you cannot square it. Here is a secret from up here, from my side of the telling. No one ever squares it. The historians are still at the ledger tonight, and the sums still will not come out, and the wisest of them end roughly where a boy on a cloister floor ended in February 1649, that it was a tragedy with no villain sufficient to explain it, or too many, that everyone in it believed themselves obedient to something higher, and that the price of certainty in any age is paid by people who were not consulted. Hold that thought loosely, like a warm stone, and let it go. It's not yours to carry either. You sleep 3 hours and dream of soldering an endless seam that keeps opening behind the iron, and wake before the drum and lie in the dark listening to the castle come alive. Bolts, boots, the chapel doors groan, a bucket ringing on a well-stone somewhere, the first crow, and the last thought you have before Master Crane's hand finds your shoulder is of the small grey figure on the terrace, pausing to memorize the river. The morning of the 9th of February, 1649, comes up grey and mean, with a low sky the colour of wet slate, and the first thing you hear when they walk you across the ward is Master Crane muttering at that sky like a farmer. "More coming," he says. "Look at it. Bags full." He means snow. He's right, and how right he is will matter before the day is out, will matter for 3.5 centuries, in a way none of you can guess. The morning is preparation. The vault mouth must be widened. 2 more pavement stones up, the edges dressed so the coffin can be lowered square without fouling the brickwork. This is pick and bar work, and it is brutal. Frost has gotten into the bedding sand under the stones and turned it to something like weak mortar, and every stone fights. You work stripped to shirt and waistcoat despite the cold, because within 10 minutes of swinging a bar your body's a furnace, sweat runs into the small of your back and freezes there the instant you rest. Your palms burn against the iron even through the rag wrappings, and your breath comes in huge white sails. The sound of iron on stone in that vast empty chapel is enormous, offensive, wrong. A quarry noise in a holy place, and every stroke echoes off the fan vaulting and comes back at you doubled, so it sounds like a second invisible crew is opening a second invisible grave somewhere up in the roof, ropes next. Lowering a 1/4 ton of lead and oak 8 feet down into a brick vault without dropping it, tilting it or crushing a man is a rigging problem, and it turns out the garrison has a man for it, a gunner, a squat Cornishman who has spent his life moving cannon, who takes over the rope work with the serenity of complete competence. 2 bulks of timber across the vault mouth, 3 ropes, 1 at the head, 1 at the foot, 1 steadying, sand scattered on the pavement so boots won't slip. He makes you and the soldiers practice the lower with a crate of shot first, twice, until the crate goes down smooth as a bucket into a well, and he nods, satisfied, and says the only thing you'll ever hear him say, "Slow is safe, safe is respectful." The morning stretches after that, the way mornings before great events always stretch, everything ready 2 hours early and time going gluey. The soldiers detailed to the chapel stand easy along the aisle wall and talk in the low, ceilingless murmur men use in churches even when their creed says the building is nothing special, and because you're a boy, with sand and rope and nothing to do, you drift near, and because you're a boy, they let you listen. They talk about the trial. Half of them saw some of it. Windsor men were rotated through Westminster duty in January, and they argue it in the tired, grooved way of men who've argued it nightly for a fortnight. How the king refused all 4 days to plead, would not answer the charge, would not take off his hat to the court, sat there in the great hall, where they'd tried traitors for centuries, and now a king in the dock of it, resting on his cane, half smiling, asking again and again by what lawful authority he was brought there. And the terrible thing, one soldier says, the terrible thing was it was a fair question, and the court could never quite answer it except with the sword under the words, and everyone in the hall knew it, and it didn't matter, and that not mattering was the loudest thing in England. How the silver head of his cane fell off once, early on, and rolled, and no page or attendant stepped out to pick it up. For the first time in his life, no one. And the king looked at it a moment, and then stooped and picked it up himself, and men who watched said a shadow crossed his face as he did it, as if in that small stooping the whole future had been shown him. And they talk about the 59 names on the warrant, and which colonel signed eager, and which had to be cornered, and one of them says Cromwell was merry as a wedding guest at the signing, flicking ink at the next man's face, laughing. Great men are strange under great weight. Laughter comes out of them sideways. And another says he heard the executioner was fetched secret and masked and paid £30, and no man knows his name to this day. And a third says quietly that he knows a man who helped hold the low block steady, and that man has not slept a night through since. And then nobody says anything for a while, and the wind flutes in the broken pane, and you stand there among Parliament soldiers in the King's Chapel, and understand something that no pamphlet on either side will ever print, that almost every man in England, whichever way he fought, is carrying some splinter of the 30th of January in him, and will carry it to his own grave, and that a country can win a war and still walk wounded for a generation. Then a corporal comes down the aisle saying they're moving, look alive, and the murmur stops, and every man finds his place, and the great doors are unbarred, and history stops being talk. And then, a little after noon, everything stops, because word runs through the chapel like a draught under a door. The lords are come down from the castle apartments, and the king is coming from the room where he lies, and this next part travels in a whisper, incredulous, scandalized. The governor has refused the bishop. Here is what has happened, and I need you to sit with this, because of everything in these strange days. This is the moment that history will not forget. The 4 lords have brought with them William Juxon, Bishop of London, the king's own chaplain, the man who stood beside him on the scaffold, who received his last word. Remember, the king said to him, one word, and men will argue about what it meant for 400 years. Juxon has come to Windsor to do the one thing left that anyone can do for Charles Stuart, to read the burial service over him, the old service, the order for the burial of the dead from the Book of Common Prayer. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. Man that is born of a woman hath but a short time to live. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The words every English person of that age has heard at every graveside since childhood. The words the king himself lived by, and quite literally died for, because his refusal to abandon that church and that book was, as much as anything, the rock the whole war broke on. And Parliament has abolished it. The Book of Common Prayer is banned in public worship, its use an offence. To the men now governing England it is popish rubbish, man-made mumbling. And Colonel Whichcott, Governor of Windsor, a fair man but a man under orders, and a genuine believer in the new way, tells the Lords, no, the Common Prayer is put down by ordinance of Parliament. It will not be read in this chapel, not for anyone, not even for the King it would bury. They argue, of course they argue, courteously, quietly, in that terrible restrained way of ruined men who cannot afford to rage. Richmond presses, Hertford presses. The governor is respectful, even sorrowful, and immovable. He offers his own kind. A godly minister might speak. Prayers of the approved sort might be said. The Lords decline. If their king cannot be buried with the words of his own church, he will be buried with none at all. Silence chosen as the last loyalty. So it is settled. In the coldest compromise in English history, the King of England will be buried without one single word. You hear all this second and third hand standing by the vault mouth with sand on your boots and rope in your hands, the whispers relaying along the line of soldiers and workmen like fire along a match cord. And you can feel in the men around you, Parliament's own soldiers, mind, men who fought against this king, something turn over. A soldier near you, an older man with a Bible-clasped face mutters, he should have his words, and stares at the floor, even here, even among his enemies. There is a line, and everyone can feel where it is, and everyone can feel that today England is standing on the far side of it. And then the doors at the West End open, and the cold comes in, and the king comes with it. They carry him shoulder high, gentlemen of his household and the lords themselves taking the weight. And lead is a cruel weight. You know exactly what those men's shoulders are feeling. The bite of the edge, the sag between steps, up the long nave, through that ruined magnificence. No choir, no organ. The organ is broken, remember, and would be forbidden anyway. No bell, no voices. The only sounds in St. George's Chapel are boots on stone, slow, out of step, and then falling into step the way carrying men always do, and breath, and the tiny creak of the coffin's weight shifting, and the wind leaning on the great windows. And here is the thing, the detail that the men who are present would tell for the rest of their lives, the detail that turned the day into legend before the grave was even closed. To reach the chapel from the castle apartments, the bearers must cross open ground, and the sky, that low slate sky full of bags, chooses that quarter hour to open. Snow comes down, not drifting, but falling with silent purpose, big soft flakes hurrying, and it falls on the coffin as they carry it, and the coffin is covered with a pall of black velvet, the one touch of funeral state permitted. And by the time the bearers reach the chapel door, the black pall is white, entirely white. The snow has lain on the velvet and not melted because the day is so cold, and the lead beneath so much colder, and the king goes to his grave under a covering that heaven itself has changed from black to white. The men who see it do not treat it as weather. You must understand these people. They live in a world soaked in signs, where God writes in comets and harvests and, yes, in snow. White is the colour of innocence, and Charles's followers already speak of him as a martyr. Within days a book will appear, the Icon Basilique, the royal portrait claiming to be the king's own meditations, and it will run through 35 editions in a year and be the best-selling book in England after the Bible, and it will fix in half the nation's heart the image of Charles the Martyr. So when the pall turns white, the men carrying it read the message as plainly as print. The king went white to his grave. innocent, justified. The White King. Men remember now, shivering, that he was crowned in white satin all those years ago against all custom, and that the old wives called it unlucky then. You see it yourself, from your place at the vault. You see them come up the choir, 4 lords and the gentlemen, snow still melting now in the sudden stillness of indoors, sliding off the velvet in small wet sheets, and the white turning back to black in streaks and patches, as if the sign, having been given, is being withdrawn. You see the Bishop of London, Juxon, walking behind with a book in his hands. The book, the forbidden book, carried closed. He will hold it closed through everything that follows. There are men who would rather have burned a hand than carry that book closed at that graveside, and he carries it closed, because the alternative is not to be there at all. They set the coffin down on the timbers over the vault. And then comes the silence, and the silence is the funeral. I want to slow down here, because this is the centre of the whole story, and it lasted perhaps 10 minutes, and nothing happened in it, and that nothing is one of the loudest things in English history. Picture the scene from where you stand holding your rope. The great stripped chapel, dim as dusk at 2 in the afternoon, the fan vaults dissolving upward into shadow, the open vault at your feet breathing its 100-year cold, the lantern down inside it throwing brick shadows, the small coffin on its timbers, black velvet still wet-streaked with dead snow. Around it, in a rough ring, 4 noblemen who between them have lost fortunes, brothers, fathers, and now the man all of it was lost for. A bishop holding a closed book, a governor standing with his hat on. The lords' heads are bare, mark that. Bare in the killing cold, and the Puritan officers keep their hats on, because to them no ground is holier than other ground. And even now, even here, nobody will yield 1 inch of principle, and the hats themselves are a war. No one speaks. The wind speaks. It finds the broken pane somewhere high in a clerestory window and plays it like a bottle top, a thin fluting note that comes and goes. A rope creaks in your hand. Somewhere behind you a soldier's stomach growls, enormous in the hush, and no one smiles. The Earl of Lindsay's breath shakes on the way out. Once, twice. The sound of a man crying with his whole body while permitting his face nothing at all. And in your head, you can't stop it. No one there can stop it. The forbidden words say themselves. You've heard them at every funeral of your life. Your grandmothers, your baby sisters, the old Coopers from Thames Street. Man that is born of a woman hath but a short time to live, and is full of misery. He cometh up, and is cut down like a flower. You know every person in that ring is hearing the same silent voice, the bishop most of all, the words pressing against the inside of the closed book like water against a lock gate. Forbidding a thing, it turns out, does not remove it. It only drives it inward, where it rings louder. The Duke of Richmond nods once. The gunner's hand comes up. Slow is safe. Safe is respectful. The soldiers take the ropes with you. You brace your heel against the sand-gritted stone. The timbers are drawn, and the whole weight of it comes onto your arms, that dense, dead, absolute lead weight, the heaviest thing you will ever hold in every sense that words can carry. And hand over hand, an inch at a breath, the rope's fibres hot against your rag-wrapped palms, your shoulders singing, the King of England goes down into the earth. The coffin settles onto the vault floor beside Henry VIII's with a sound you will never forget, and it is not a boom or a knell. It is a soft, gritty, final crunch, lead onto brick dust, the most ordinary sound in the world. a sack of grain set down in a cellar. That sound for the anointed of God. The ropes are drawn up. They hiss over the coffin's edge and come up light, and your arms, suddenly unburdened, float. Someone lowers the folded pall down onto the coffin. The lantern is brought up. And for one moment, before the stones go back, everyone looks down into the dark at the three of them lying together. The huge ruined coffin, the slight quiet one, the new one with its scratched plate. Henry, Jane, Charles, 100 years of England's argument with itself, sharing one small brick room in the dark. Then Master Crane touches your shoulder, and you take up the bar and you begin to close the floor. Closing a floor is harder than opening one, if you want it closed well, and they want it closed well. They want it closed so that in a month, in a year, a stranger could walk the choir from end to end and never know. That is the whole point. No shrine, no mark, no place for a man to kneel. So you work into the failing light of the afternoon, and then by lantern, and the Lord stay for some of it. Richmond stands watching the first stone go back down as if he were watching a door close on a room with a living man inside, and then he turns, abruptly, the way people turn when they can bear a thing precisely no longer, and the four of them go, and the bishop with them, his book still closed, and the chapel is just workmen and soldiers again, and somehow that is when your throat finally aches. When the great people are gone and it's only you and the stones. The bedding sand goes back first, spread and screeded level with a board. Then each pavement stone lowered on the bars, walked into place with taps of the maul through a wooden block so the stone's face takes no scar. Then the joints. Master Crane has brought lime and stone dust, and he mixes the pointing mortar himself, and he tints it. This is craft at the level of lying. He crushes soot and a little ochre into the mix, tests a smear against the old joints in the lantern light, adds, tests again, until new mortar and century-old mortar are brothers. You point the joints with a bent iron, strike them flush, and then, his idea, muttered, half ashamed of its own cunning. You sweep the whole area with dust gathered from under the choir stalls, working the grey age of the place back over the wound, dirtying as a mason's mercy. By 8 o'clock at night there is nothing to see. Nothing. Lantern held low, rake in light, the worst light for hiding things. Nothing. Flat stones, old dust, done. The governor comes with 2 officers and walks the pavement back and forth, eyes down, and you watch him fail to find the grave that he himself attended 8 hours before, and you feel, God forgive you at a king's tomb, a flicker of tradesman's pride, hot and quick, followed by the strangest hollow feeling of your life, because it worked, because it is already gone. Because you can stand in the middle of the choir of St. George's and the eye finds no king anywhere, and in a few years, when the sand has settled and the dust has married, no eye will, and the men who know are so few you could seat them at one table. The governor gives Master Crane a purse, he gives the soldiers something. To you he gives a long look and says, "You are told what silence you owe. Yes, sir, keep it, and you'll have no trouble from any man, and that is your payment ceremony, and then it is over, and a corporal walks you both down the hill in the dark, and the snow has stopped, and the stars are out for the first time in a fortnight, savage and brilliant the way they only are in hard frost, and Windsor lies under its white blanket with here and there a seam of firelight at a shutter, and your legs are trembling with spent effort all the way down Peascod Street, and Mistress Crane opens the door before your master can knock. She has been listening for footsteps for 2 days, and the heat of the kitchen hits you like a wall, and the smell of peas pottage nearly buckles your knees. She asks nothing. She is a joiner's wife of 30 years. She has fed her husband after 100 silent jobs, though never one with soldiers. She fills your bowl twice, and then a third time, and mends the split at your thumb base with the smear of her marigold salve and a wrap of linen, her hands quick and rough and unbearably kind, and says only, once, not really to either of you. There's them that's warm tonight and them that isn't, and we're warm. And that is the funeral supper of King Charles I, as eaten by the people who buried him. Peas, pottage, salt bacon, small beer, and a woman's tact. You sleep 12 hours. You wake in the loft with the low sun through the shutter crack laying a blade of gold across the floorboards, and for 3 breaths you are only a boy in a warm blanket smelling sawdust. And then your right hand throbs, and the 2 days come back and sit on your chest. And then, this is the part nobody warns you about, life simply continues. That's the strangest thing. You have a secret the size of a cathedral in you, and Monday still comes. The shop reopens. There are coffins wanted. It's February and a terrible winter. There are always coffins wanted in February. Ordinary ones, elm and deal, for the carpenter's mother who went in her sleep, and the ferryman's boy taken by a putrid throat. You plane boards, you boil glue, and the wet dog smell of it is the same as ever. You deliver a cradle, of all things, to a house by the bridge, because your master's shop makes those too. The 2 ends of the road. He calls the work cradles and coffins, and business at both ends never stops. Your hands do Tuesday things and Wednesday things. The split on your thumb closes finally in the spring and leaves a thin white scar that you will carry to your own grave, your only medal. And around you, that spring and after, England goes about the enormous business of pretending to be sure of itself. In March they abolish the monarchy outright, an Act of Parliament declaring the office of king unnecessary, burdensome and dangerous. Unnecessary. 600 years, and then that word, in ink. In May they declare England a commonwealth. The new state's great seal shows the House of Commons sitting, and the words, "The first year of freedom by God's blessing restored." The coins change. That is the thing you keep noticing, the small thing, the coins. The face you knew, the face you sealed under lead in the candle room, disappears from the new money, replaced by shields and palm branches, and yet the old coins go on passing hand to hand for years, so the dead man keeps arriving in your palm on market days, silver and small, and every single time, for the rest of your life, your thumb finds his profile and rubs it once, an accident that is not an accident, and you put him in your purse and say nothing, because you say nothing. That is your portion of the story now, the saying nothing. You learn what a secret actually is that year. You'd thought a secret was a treasure you guard. It isn't. A secret is a lodger. It lives in you, eats at your table, wakes when you wake. In church, the New Lean services, all sermon and psalm. Your eyes drift to pavement stones, any pavement stones, and you think, floors are full everywhere, aren't they? The whole of England is walking around on its dead. When talk in the tavern turns to the king, as it constantly does, and the wild theories start, he isn't dead at all. A servant died in his place. He's in France. He's in Rome. They buried him at midnight in the Thames mud. The body was sold to surgeons. You drink your ale and let the nonsense wash you, and the lodger in your chest turns over and settles, and you say, "Who knows which is the truest lie there is?" Twice it nearly comes out of you. Once that first summer, lying in the grass above the river with a girl called Susan, whose father keeps the chandlery, when she says dreamy, watching the swifts, that she heard the king was carried through Windsor and wonders was it true, and the words I carried the rope actually reach your teeth before you swallow them. And once, years on, when your mother is dying and wandering, and takes your hand thinking you are your father, and asks whether the poor king ever got Christian burial. It troubled her. It troubled thousands of ordinary women like her, the thought of him unprayed for. And you look at her going, and you decide that a deathbed is beyond every governor's order, and you lean close and say, quietly, "He's buried in a fine chapel, mother, beside great kings, and it was done gently. I know it for certain." And her face eases, and she doesn't ask how you know, because the dying don't need chains of evidence, only bread. It is the single time in your life you spend the secret, one coin of it, and you never once regret the purchase. Let me give you that first year without a king, season by season, the way you lived it, because a year is the honest unit of grief and of history alike, and this one carried both. Spring 1649 comes late and grudging. The great snow does not so much melt as surrender street by street, and Windsor spends March ankle-deep in grey slush that gets into every seam of every boot, and the Thames rises brown and violent with the melt, drowning the meadows below Eton, and the ferryman, the same ferryman whose boy you made the small coffin for, will not cross for 2 weeks together. Prices are cruel. Bread is dear all over England. The harvests of the last 2 years failed, and war taxes sit on top of scarcity, and the free quarter of soldiers on top of that. And you hear more real anger in the market over the price of barley than you ever hear over the abolition of the monarchy. That is a lesson worth soldering in. Nations argue about crowns, but they mutiny about bread. And through that hungry spring, the book comes. The Icon Basilic, the King's Book, everyone calls it, appearing within days of the execution as if timed by heaven or a very good publisher, and the government's efforts to suppress it work the way suppression always works. Every copy becomes 2. It reaches Windsor by March, passed hand to hand, read aloud in back rooms, a small thick volume of the king's supposed prayers and meditations in captivity, with a famous engraved frontispiece, the king kneeling, laying down his earthly crown, grasping a crown of thorns, his eyes on a heavenly crown, and the merits of the prose matter not at all beside the fact of it. A dead man is out-arguing a living government. Parliament sets its own great pen against it. A fierce Latin secretary named John Milton, blind before 10 years are out, who will spend his darkness composing a poem about paradise. And Milton's answer is clever and savage, and read by hundreds, and the King's Book is wept over by tens of thousands, and you, who knelt at the actual coffin, read a borrowed copy in the loft by rushlight and find it beautiful and cannot for the life of you connect it to the rapt weight you helped lower, and you begin to understand that there are now 2 Charles Stuarts, the man under the pavement, whom 11 people could find, and the martyr in the book, whom no one can miss, and that the second one is loose in the world, and will do more than the first ever did. Summer brings the levellers of grass and the levellers of men. Haymaking in the meadows, the first honest sweat of the year that isn't work sweat. Poppies in the corn on the Datchet side, and politics down the road at Burford in the spring. Soldiers of the army itself rising, saying this was not the freedom they fought for, demanding the vote for ordinary men, and Cromwell breaking them at midnight and shooting the ringleaders against a church wall. and the news of it arrives in Windsor with the carriers and is argued over your head at the Garter Inn while you drink your one small beer. The revolution eating its first children, though nobody has that phrase yet. You listen and say nothing, which is becoming your trade beneath your trade. Master Crane beside you says only, on the walk home, "Mark it, Thomas. Yesterday's rebel is tomorrow's magistrate and the day after's headsman. Keep the shop." Keep the shop. It sits beside the seam in your small collection of scripture. Autumn is coffins. It is always coffins, autumn. But 1649 is worse. An age goes through the parish with the September rains, the low town by the river coffin its way into October, and you and the master work 6 days a week at the two ends of the road. 3 cradles that season, and 19 coffins, and you price the poor ones at cost and some below, because Crane has rules he's never once spoken aloud, and you're learning them by hand. The elm comes in wet and must be dried by the fire in stacks, and the shop smells like a forest drowning, and your palms that winter finally finish becoming your master's palms. The yellow horn across the pads, the cracks at the thumb roots that open and close with the weather like the ground itself, the grip that can hold a plane all day and by evening cannot quite manage a needle. Susan threads your needles now. When there's mending, you pretend to mind. And then winter again, the first anniversary sliding by unmarked. No bells for the dead king, that would be sedition. But you notice on the 30th of January 1650, a strange quietness in the town all day, doors closed, less business than a Tuesday deserves, and at dusk in more windows than could be coincidence, a single candle lit and set on the sill, saying nothing, saying everything. The government cannot forbid a candle. Mistress Crane sets one in the shop window herself, and when the master raises an eyebrow she says, "It's for my mother," and her mother is 20 years dead. And he nods slowly, and the candle burns down, and you go up to your loft past its small gold point of light, and lie listening to the second winter's wind, 1 year a keeper of the floor now, and find that the lodger in your chest has grown quieter, settled in, paying its rent in strange coin, a certain patience at gravesides, a certain gentleness with the bereaved that men remark on, a certain immunity to every loud certainty shouted in every tavern, because you have knelt at the exact centre of the age's argument, at the still point of it, and you know what the centre actually was. A small brick room, and snow, and silence, and men of both sides standing hatted and bareheaded around a hole, all of them, for 10 minutes, out of words together. The years pass, and you should see how they pass, because you are living through one of the strangest stretches of time any English generation ever got. The Commonwealth hardens into the Protectorate. Oliver Cromwell, the name that was a rumour when you were a boy, then a thunderclap, then the weather itself, rules England more completely than the man you buried ever managed to. They offer Cromwell the crown in the end. Think of that. And he agonises for weeks and refuses it, and takes instead a king's power without a king's name, and lives in the dead king's palaces, and is installed at Westminster in a king's chair. The theatres stay shut. Christmas is abolished. Abolished. Feasting banned. Shops ordered open on Christmas Day. Soldiers in London pulling down holly and confiscating geese. And in Windsor, as everywhere, the goose is cooked anyway behind shuttered windows, and you learn the great truth of governments. You can command a nation's floors and walls, but its kitchens will beat you every time. You finish your apprenticeship in 1651, journeyman fen. In 1655, when Master Crane's hands finally shake too much for fine work, lead, maybe, or just 50 years as mornings, you take over the shop and marry Susan of the Chandlery, whose questions about the king you never did answer, and who has long since stopped asking, and who knows you carry something and has decided with a wisdom you don't deserve that whatever it is, it makes you gentle at funerals, and that this is not a fault in a coffin maker. Master Crane dies in the winter of 1657. You make his coffin yourself, Elm, every joint the best of your life, and at the graveside, the lean new service, a psalm in the cold, you stand where the Master stands, and you find your lips moving around the old forbidden words for him, silently, the way the whole ring of mourners moved around them silently in the chapel that day, and you understand at last that this is what the words became when they were banned. Not gone, but underground, buried, alive, in 10,000 memories, under the floorboards of the nation, waiting. And then, 1658, September, in the middle of the greatest storm in living memory, trees down all over the great park, Cromwell dies, and the whole iron structure he held up with his two hands begins, almost politely, to lean. His son takes over, and cannot hold it, and resigns. The generals eye each other. The money wobbles, and in the spring of 1660 the thing happens that no one dared say aloud for 11 years, and then suddenly everyone was saying in the street, the king shall have his own again. Charles II, the 18-year-old across the water, now 30, tall and black-haired and clever and nothing like his father, lands at Dover in May of 1660, and England goes off like a beacon chain. Bells, bonfires, fountains, allegedly running wine. The road from Dover to London, one continuous crowd. In Windsor, the bells of the parish church ring until people swear the ringers had to be carried home. Maypoles go up that were hidden, actual maypoles, kept in barns for 2 decades. Christmas comes back. The prayer book comes back. The first Sunday you hear the old burial word spoken aloud in public again, legally, over the grave of a tanner's widow. You have to step behind a yew tree for a moment, 41 years old, master of your trade, blubbing like a boy, and you could not, if God required it, say exactly for whom. And now, you've been waiting for this, and so, all his life, has the man in the vault. Now, surely, comes the great reburial. The Martyr King translated to Westminster Abbey with all solemnity the monument, the vindication. It is proposed immediately. Parliament votes money for it. The Sun intends it, and the men who know the spot are called on, and here the story turns strange one final time, strange and sad and so human it hurts. They can't find him, not officially, not with certainty. The witnesses' memories have shifted the way memories do. 11 years, and one man says the middle of the choir, and another says nearer the stall, and the sounding bar knocks and the floor answers ambiguously, and there are other voids, other vaults, the whole choir is a honeycomb, and the account books that would settle it are lost or burnt, and Richmond is dead, and Hertford dies that very autumn, and the search, half-hearted, some say. There are darker whispers, too, that the new king's men feared what 11 years and a rough embalming might have left to look at, that some questions are better left under stone. The search is quietly dropped. The great reburial never happens. The money is spent elsewhere. The sun builds no tomb, and nobody asks a coffin-maker in Peascod Street. Why would they? And what would you have said if they had? You've turned that over on more winter nights than you can count. You were sworn to a government that no longer exists by men who are dead, in a cause that lost. The oath is a ghost. But you find, examining yourself honestly by your own fireside, an old man now with lead-scarred hands, that it was never really the oath. It's that you saw the floor closed, you helped close it. You matched the mortar and swept the old dust over the seam, and something in you says, he is quiet at last next to the great quiet Henry, under the stones and the singing. Because the choir is back now, the organ rebuilt, and every evening the psalms roll down that choir and over that unmarked pavement like a tide over sand, and no man living can trouble him. That is not the worst monument. You have made hundreds of graves. You know that the marked ones are for the living. The dead ask only to be let down gently and left in peace, and he was, and he is, and one of the 2 men in England who is certain of it makes coffins in Windsor and holds his tongue. And the world does its best over the years to shake the secret loose, and fails. In 1665 comes the Great Plague, London dying by the thousand each week through that horrific summer, the court fleeing, grass literally growing in Whitehall's courts, and it licks out along the river towns, and Windsor shuts itself in as best it can, and you make coffins that season faster and plainer than a Christian man should ever have to, and bury 2 of your own journeymen, and one September night, dead tired, half asleep at the bench, you find yourself thinking with a strange upside-down comfort of the tightest work you ever did. At least he is sealed, you think. At least there is one man in England the plague cannot touch. And you catch yourself and laugh once quietly in the empty shop at what a mind will do at midnight in a mortal year. In 1666, London burns. You see the glow of it from the top of the 100 Steps 2 nights running, a false dawn hanging in the east that everyone in Windsor climbs to look at, 30 miles away and visible, old St. Paul's going up like a torch, its acres of lead roof. Lead, always lead, your whole age is roofed and coffined in it, running molten down the streets by report, and men around you on the steps mutter about the wrath of God, and count the causes on their fingers, and there are many fingers pointed, and the dead king's name is on some of them. Judgment for the killing come at last, and on others it's judgment for the sins of the restored court, and you notice, not for the first time, that God's handwriting is read fluently by everyone in strictly opposite directions, and you climb back down and go to bed. Kings and would-be kings churn on. Charles II, who never built his father the tomb, charms and dodges and dies in his bed in 1685, apologising with typical grace for being such an unconscionable time about it. And his brother James takes the throne and fumbles it in 3 short years. And one November a Dutch prince lands with an army, and the whole thing changes hands again almost without blood, and they call it glorious. And in the Garter Inn the old men who remember the 40s say, "Into their ale, lo, we did that first, you know. Ours cost more." Nobody thanks them for the observation, and through all of it you grow old in the one town, the one street, the one trade, and the vault holds you as much as you hold it. You could have left once or twice. There was talk of a London work after the fire, fortunes for any man who could join 2 boards, half the city to rebuild, and you thought about it for a fortnight and knew, without being able to say it even to Susan, that you were staying near the hill, not to guard anything. There's nothing to guard. Stone guards itself. Just that a man likes to live within sight of the truest thing he ever did. Your apprentices come and go, become masters in Reading and Guildford, and one improbably in Boston across the ocean, and to each of them somewhere in their 3rd year at the bench You hand down the sayings. Steady the feed. Do the seam. The rest isn't ours to carry. Keep the shop. Make it true. And they take them as workshop wisdom, which they are, and never know they're also the moral of a story you can't tell. That's how such things travel mostly, stripped of their occasions, anonymous as river stones. Some saying you yourself use every week came out of some other century's sealed room, worn smooth, its coffin long forgotten. The last time you climb the hill to the chapel, you are past 70. It's an ordinary evening in the reign of William and Mary. Evensong is sung now to an organ young men call old, and you stand at the back of the choir, a stooped tradesman in a decent coat, invisible, which has always been your best trick, while the psalms go over the stones. You know the spot within a yard. You do not go and stand on it. You never once in 50 years went and stood on it. It would have felt like knocking. You just listen to the singing lie down over the pavement like snow, and you check your work one last time with your eyes. Flat stones, old dust, nothing, and you find it good, and you go home down the hill in the blue dusk, one handrail and many pauses, and Susan has the fire up, and that is the end of your commerce with kings. So the vault sleeps, and it sleeps longer than you can imagine, so let me tell you the end of it. The part beyond your life, because you've earned the ending. It sleeps through your old age. It sleeps while you teach your own apprentices. Steady the feed, do the seam. The rest isn't ours to carry. And while Susan and you grow stooped in the same kitchen, and yell the new St. Paul's rises over London out of the ashes of the great fire, and it sleeps when they lay you down yourself, in the churchyard by the river, in an elm coffin your best apprentice makes, and God willing joints tightly. It sleeps through the whole of the next century. Kings called George come and go overhead. The Knights of the Garter process over the pavement in their velvet, heels knocking on the stones, and no knock answers. And then, in 1813, 164 years after your 2 days of candlelight and lead, workmen cutting a passage for a new royal tomb in St. George's Chapel break, by pure accident, through a brick wall, and find themselves looking into a small vault where the lantern shows 3 coffins, a huge ruined one, a slight one, and beside them a plain leaden one bearing a scratched plate that reads King Charles, 1648. The Prince Regent is told. The King's physician, a famous man called Sir Henry Halford, is summoned, and in the presence of the Prince the lead is opened. Your seam, your master's silver cord seam, parted after a century and a half, and the cerecloth unwrapped, and there, unmistakable, is the face half of Europe painted. The pointed beard still dark, the long face the crowds knew. The head, the doctor's note with quiet professional horror, lies loose. The 4th vertebra is cut through, its surface, one witness wrote, perfectly smooth, one blow, true and clean, every question answered, every tavern theory of your lifetime, the switched servant, the escape to France, the Thames mud, dead in one lantern-lit minute. It was him. It was always him. He was exactly where the silent men put him on the 9th of February in the snow. They take a lock of hair and a fragment of the vertebra as relics, the age being what it is, and decades later a more scrupulous prince, the future Edward VII, has even those returned and sealed back into the vault. And there they all still lie, this very night, while you listen to me. Henry and Jane and Charles, under the choir of St. George's, beneath a small marble slab that was finally, in 1837, allowed to say so. You can stand on it today. Tourists do all day long, mostly without noticing, which, you of all people would appreciate this as very nearly the original arrangement. But that's the far end of the thread. Come back now. Come back to where we can leave you properly. Windsor, deep in that same iron winter, a few weeks after the burial. February becoming March, 1649, and nothing in the world knowing yet how any of it turns out. It's evening. The shop is shuttered. You've eaten. Master Crane has gone up, and Mistress Crane sits by the fire with her mending, the needle ticking through wool, in and out, the small dry whisper of thread drawn tight, and the fire has burned down to that best stage, past flame, all glow, the coals breathing in and out like something sleeping, ticking as they settle, throwing a light the colour of October onto the ceiling beams. You're at the bench with a candle, finishing tomorrow's work tonight because your hands wanted it, smoothing the inside of a coffin lid for the ferryman's boy, working fine sandstone dust and oil along the grain with a pad of cloth, in slow circles, and the wood under your fingers goes from smooth to smoother to something past smooth, something like still water, and the smell is oil and pine and candle tallow, and your shoulders ache in the old familiar places, and the split on your thumb pulls a little under its linen, and outside the wind has dropped, and the snow, the last snow of that endless winter, though you don't know it, is coming down without a sound. You can't hear snow, but you can hear what snow does. It takes every other sound away. No cart, no dog, no boots. The town wrapped, muffled, held. Half a mile up the hill, the castle stands over it all, black on charcoal grey, one gate torch burning. And under the castle, under the chapel, under the pavement you closed with your own hands, in the small brick room, in the absolute dark, in the absolute quiet, the three of them lie. The old king, the young queen, the new one. And the snow lies down on the chapel roof above them, layer on soundless layer, the whole sky coming down slowly to keep the lid on England. You think, hands still circling wood like water, that everyone in this town is lying down now in the dark, the soldiers in the guard room, the governor in his quarters, the vergers, Susan above the chandlery, your mother across town, all of them warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, alive enough, breathing in their separate darks under one snow, and the ones past breathing under their floors and their churchyard grass, quiet at last, every argument finished, every axe laid down. The candle is short. You could start another board. You're not going to start another board. You wipe the oil from your fingers, rag over each knuckle, slow. You pinch the candle, the little bite of heat, the smoke thread, the dark coming up the walls like water rising kindly. You climb the ladder on aching legs. The loft is cold, but the blanket is where you left it, and your body folds into the old shape, knees up, hands together at your chest like a man praying by accident, and the straw ticks and settles under you, the way the coals tick and settle below. And the house holds you the way the snow holds the town, the way the stone holds the kings. Your eyes close, and the day lets go of you, piece by piece. The bench, the oiled lid, the mending needle, the rope in your palms, that goes last. The hands always remember longest, and then even that. Tomorrow there will be boards to plane. Tomorrow there will be glue to boil, and the ferryman to face, and snow to shovel from the door. Tomorrow, tomorrow. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's only the blanket's weight, and your own breath slowing and the enormous gentle silence of a buried world. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a trade, and a roof, and a scar on your thumb, and a secret that harms no one and keeps one dead man company. That's more than most in England have tonight. That's enough. Stay there, in the loft, in the dark, a little longer. There's no hurry now. There's never as much hurry as the day pretended. Feel how the warmth builds under the blanket, slowly, the way warmth does. First your chest, then your folded hands, then, last of all, and always last, your feet, which spent the day on stone and hold their cold like a grudge, and then, finally give it up. Feel the pallet take your weight completely, every muscle handing in its resignation one by one. The shoulders first, letting the arms go heavy, then the long muscles of the back, unknotting like wet rope, then the jaw, which you never notice you're holding until the moment you stop, then the hands. The hands are last after the feet. The hands remember the day longest. The dresser, the rope, the bar, the oiled cloth going in circles. And then even the hands forget, and lie open on the blanket like tools laid down at the end of the work, which is what they are. Listen to the house, the coals ticking themselves to sleep downstairs, slower now, tick and tick, each one further from the last. The needle silent, the mending folded, Mistress Crane's door long closed, a beam somewhere contracting in the cold with a single soft knock, the house cracking its knuckles 600 nights out of every year, and you've never once been afraid of it, because a joiner's boy knows the sounds wood makes when it's only settling. Everything in the dark around you is only settling. Listen further out. Nothing. The snow has the town. No cart will pass now till morning. No dog will bark. Dogs know snow nights too and curl deeper. The watchman won't call the hour down this street till 2, and by 2 you'll be so far down that his voice will reach you the way the chapel clock reached you through 10 feet of stone. Sound coming through water, belonging to some other upper world that can manage itself without you for a while. It can, you know. That's the last thing to set down tonight, and the hardest, and you learned it younger than most because a fat old joiner said it to you across a king. The rest isn't ours to carry. The town will stand till morning without you holding it up. The snow will fall correctly without supervision. The great and the terrible will go on being great and terrible somewhere far off, and the floor will stay closed, and the dead will keep their own counsel, and everything you're responsible for is already done. The seams soldered, the stones flat, the tools racked, the fire banked, the door barred. Walk through the list once, slowly, the way you walk the shop last thing with a candle. Seam, done. Stones, flat. Tools, racked. Fire, banked. Door, barred. There's nothing left open anywhere. You can put the candle out. Breathe in, slow, the cold, clean air of the loft with its sawdust sweetness. Breathe out slower and feel yourself go down a little with it. The way the coffin went down, an inch at a breath. Steady hands on the rope. Slow is safe. Safe is respectful. Down past the day, down past the week, down past the strange, great year, down into the brick quiet dark where nothing has happened for 100 years, and nothing will be asked of anyone till morning. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, tired enough, at last. Down and down and gently down. Listen. Centuries will pass. The Windsor you know will change beyond recognition. The castle will be rebuilt and re-rebuilt until your grey garrison fortress becomes a palace of towers out of a picture book. Peascod Street will be paved and lit and filled with machines you couldn't dream and shops selling things you have no words for. The river will be tamed with locks and weirs. The wars of religion will gutter out into history lessons. No English crowd will ever again stand in the snow to watch a king die, but people will still live under that hill, still work with their hands until their knuckles crack in winter, still sit by fires at the end of long days and hold their secrets and mend each other's thumbs and lie down at night under falling snow, wondering what tomorrow brings. Some things don't change. The human heart doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, that doesn't change either, and the choir still sings every evening in the chapel on the hill. The psalms still roll down the choir and over the plain stones, over the small marble slab, over the 3 sleepers in the brick dark who have long since stopped minding whether the words above them are permitted or forbidden. The music comes down to them the way sound comes through water, the way it came to you once, kneeling with the soldering iron when the clock struck 4. Everyone gets there in the end. The terror of the world and the coffin maker's boy, the same dark, the same quiet, the same snow on the roof. It isn't a frightening thought. You learned that at 17, in a guard room, and it held true all your life. It's a hand on the shoulder, so let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Thomas Fenn in his loft above the workshop, 3.5 centuries of winters ago. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. Let the snow fall on the roof of everything. You did your seam today, whatever your seam was. The rest isn't yours to carry. You've earned this rest. Take it, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.